And so if you're just tuning in, which you are because I just turned on the recorder, we're going to create a C# application even though we're learning C++. It's possible that your installation of Visual Studio Home doesn't have C# installed. You could add it by going to, the add remove features thing in your installation. If you're using a Mac, then no, you can watch this or upload a note saying I refuse to watch it because it's not Mac. Whatever. C# is a Microsoft specific. It's primarily Windows oriented, although other versions have been created. Microsoft, after 16, 17, or 18, or 19, or 20 years of refusing to do so, has a version of C# for the Mac, but it does not support Forms applications, which we are going to use. So, we click Project New, we choose Visual C#, we choose Windows Desktop, and I forget which one I like better, Windows Forms application or WPF. Doesn't much matter. They are just different architectures, but they do the same thing. One is a little bit more modern than the other. We're going to choose WPF. We could give it a cool name. I have no idea what our lecture is. Are we on the Z's yet?
Yeah, we're on Z now.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to call this one Z space GUI, GUI, or Z without the space, something like that. WPF, Z GUI. We click OK. It runs for a little while. It's setting up stuff. It's creating files. Now in C# they're called .cs files rather than CPP files. We get a forms designer. We get a toolbox. And down here we see some XML, which looks like HTML, which describes the window. If you feel like it and you know what you're doing, you can enter code directly into the XML down here. I'm not that awesome, so I'm going to be dragging stuff from the common WPF controls over here. If you don't see your toolbox, Windows, nope. View, toolbox. That's what you're going to need. So we're going to drag some things out. We're going to drag a button. And I zoomed in by hitting the control key and scrolling up. We're going to add a text box. We're going to add a second text box. We're going to add one more text box.
How come mine keeps disappearing as soon as I drag something off?
Good question. Are you? This is going to be an add button. Let me come back there and look. So it's going to add those two numbers together and produce a result down here.
In the upper right-hand corner, do the stick pin.
The pin?
Going on. Okay, so if this is not pinned, then the toolbox goes away each time you drag something out. Maybe you like that, maybe you don't. I'm going to pin it. All right. I want these to have better variable names and better text than just text box. So I'm going to look for the name text box down here in my XML. So you see I've selected that text box. If I come down here, it's telling me which one it is. If I scroll to the left and the right, there it is, the text. I'm just going to put the number 1 in there. I'm going to put the number 2 in here. And this one's not going to have any text at all. Now, is that the only way to change this stuff? No, not at all. But I did want to show you that you can go in and you can change the document format, the XML file down here. What's the more common way of changing these things? View, I'm looking for properties. Pause. Better not. Where is it? Where are the properties? Other windows. Property manager? Fine. Okay, we can do this without this, but that's aggravating as all get out that I don't remember where the properties are. Right, guys, we're going to punt. File, new project, Windows Form application, ZGUI 2. There's my toolbox. Common controls. Drag a button out. Drag a text box out. I'm going to right click on the button, and under the button I'm going to choose properties, and we see that all important precious properties window that I couldn't find. I wonder if I went back into the other one now it'd be there. But anyways, you can see the text of the button is down here. You could change the sort order, by the way. Categorized or A to Z. So instead of button 1, this is going to say add. Instead of the button being called button 1, I'm going to make it button underscore add, or you could call it add button. I like prefixing the name of the variable of the control with what it is, with what its type is. Okay, we do need 3 text boxes, like I was planning before. So I'm going to drag one text box out, the second text box out, and a third one out. Notice there is no XML window here. The forms were invented before the WPF. The WPF is created for both creating local interfaces in Windows and interfaces that could be served up over the net, which the form cannot be. So they are different architectures, even though they look somewhat similar to what we're doing here. All right, I'm going to click on that one and see what his name is. That's text box 1. That may be good enough. Text box 2, and maybe text box 3. Is that good enough, or shall we call it text box result? I'm going to change this one to result, because that's what it's going to be. Text box underscore result. Alrighty, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to double click the add button, and it's going to create an add method in our source code. So double click the add button. You can see our class, everything that uses these frameworks, actually everything in C# is a class. So button add click, what do we got to do? We got to pull that data out of those 2 variables so that we can add them and set them to the third one. So, string S1 is equal to this dot text box 1 dot just dot text. Yeah. Like that. Notice it's not a method. In C# you can invent things that are called properties, which look like variables, but they call methods behind the scenes. It's a C# specific thing. String s2 equals this dot text box 2 dot text. Now we need to convert those to numbers. Double D1, comma D2, comma D3. We have to convert these strings to numbers. There's a couple different ways to do that in this language. One is a function called try_parse. I'm going to see if I can remember the other one. Hopefully it will look a little bit less alien. D1 is equal to double dot parse parentheses S1, like that. What's going on here? In this language, double is not a primitive data type. It's actually a class. And it's got a method that will turn a string into a number. Do you have to remember all this? No, but it's good to kind of get the idea that there are different frameworks, different languages, and they look very similar, but they also behave somewhat differently. Looking at this, once we've written it, you're going to go, yeah, I see what it's doing. So D2 is equal to double dot parse parentheses S2. Now we need to add those two numbers together. D3 equals D1 plus D2. Now we need to build a result string to store into that last drop box. So why are we using strings as these intermediary things? C++ was really nice, right? And we just use those arrows, those stream, insertion operators. And if it needed to be a number, it would give you a number. When you're doing GUI development, all those text fields you have are actually text. Whatever you're typing in, it's text. Doesn't matter whether you're doing it over HTML or running it like this. So whatever we get out of it's going to be text, which we then have to convert to a double, which is what we've done here. Let's create a string out of that. String result is equal to double dot to, that's not working, D3 dot to string. And now we're going to set the text of that last text box equal to the string. So this dot text box result dot text equals the result that we just calculated. So I run it, I type in a 6, I type in a 5, I hit add, and the framework is doing all the heavy lifting, right? The framework pulled the 6 out of the text box, pulled the 5 out of the text box, updated that to 11. All we had to do was this stuff. I don't even know if you can imagine how hard this was before you had nice graphical user interface frameworks, like back in the days of Windows 3.1 and Windows 95. The first graphical user interface framework was called MFC, which stood for Microsoft Foundation Classes. And it was still a bear to use, but it was far better. Let me show you what writing an application. Hello world, Windows 3.1. I'm probably not going to be able to find it. Hello world in many languages. I'm not seeing the horrible one. Oh, for Pete's sake. There's apparently a language called chicken. Not finding it, never mind, not going to waste your time. You had to write something called an event loop. And the event loop would handle every action that would happen to the user interface. Well, what do you mean action? Every event. Say you click on that. That's an event. You would need to decide whether the click could be ignored or not. What if it gets a drag? That's an event. You better handle that, right? You better let the window move and then refresh its contents. Here's another event. What happens when you click minimize? If you didn't add the code to it to handle the minimize, it wouldn't minimize if you click the minus sign. You know, what is it going to do if you press the maximize button? Well, you had to provide the code for that. You had to provide the code that would kill the application if they clicked the X, and so on. The frameworks do all that stuff now, so all you have to do is code the stuff you want, the extra stuff. Let's add a couple more buttons, like a multiply button. I done did something wrong. I typed in some data that was bad and it blew up. What do I mean by that? If I start it and I type in something bad here and click add, it doesn't know how to convert that to a double. There's a safe method. There's two things we could do. We could use try and catch, or we could use something called try parse. I'm not going to show you try parse because try catch is what we were just learning about, I believe. So an unhandled exception of system format exception occurred. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try this stuff right here. And if an error occurs, catch, format exception, EX, we're going to pop up a window. Forgive me for going to my, nope, that's not the right anyways. Message, box, parentheses. Let me Google it. Windows Forms message box. Messagebox.show. Okay. So, if we catch an exception, messagebox.show, parentheses, quote, error, input must be numbers. We probably ought to fill them in with some default data, like zeros or something, right? Because otherwise, they're gonna, I need to stop my debugging. Otherwise, they're likely to click the add button, and we're likely to display this. Whereas if we had some data there, if we had some zeros, they'd be less likely to mess it up. But anyways, if I click add now, error, input must be numbers. We ought to put some text here describing what to add. If we were really cool, we'd make it highlight the one that had a problem. We could use two different try blocks, right? We could find out if error was D1 or D2. And if it was D1, we would set the cursor there. And if it was D2, we'd set the cursor there. Everybody good so far? Need help? Okay. So I'm going to go back to my designer. I'm going to drag another button out. I need to change its name. So I'm going to right click, Properties, change its text. Why is that off the screen? Instead of saying button 1, it's going to say multiply. bindings. If we didn't like the name button 1, which is kind of a lame name for a button, then we can change it up here in data bindings. So I'm going to go back to this second button, choose multiply, right click, properties. Instead of button 1, it's going to be button underscore mult, or multiply. Now, do the variable names matter? No, just when you're reading the code. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to double click the multiply button. Copy paste all this code and just change the plus to multiply. Now a warning should be going off in your head. Whenever I copy and paste a whole bunch of code, is that a great thing? And the answer is no, that's not a great thing. We ought to modularize this a little bit. We ought to write a method that you passed in a variable and that variable told it whether it was to multiply or add or divide or whatever with a switch statement or something like that. And then it could do all of the rest of this stuff. So copy all that stuff, paste it, and where we added them, instead do a multiply. And I'd like for you all to do a divide on your own. Yep. All right. So everybody get the multiply one to work. If you need help on that, I need to come help, because I'm going to go over and help too. Once you get that to work, make one more button called divide. Make it do a division. Must be called something else. It's probably just called text box 3. Yeah, probably just called text box 3. So delete all that text box result, backspace, and just make it say text box 3. I don't think we changed the name of it, so that's okay. Okay. I guess instead of input must be numbers, we could use better English and say input must be numeric. Who's working on the divide button? Got it? Cool, cool.
I really lost everything else.
All
I was trying to follow what we're clicking on.
right, so I totally lost you. I'm sorry
That's
about
okay,
that.
that's okay, I'm just trying to follow along.
Okay, you did the same thing she did. It's not your fault, because I told y'all to go to the different formats. So I have to do file new, project, Windows form. compares its text. So call that one add. Do the same thing for that one, call it multiply. LTIPLY. Double click on it to create his method. Now take all the code for the add, paste it in there. So just copy everything up. There, down to the closing break. Yep, that's good. Copy. Paste. And since it's multiplying, change plus to a star. And then run it. Let's type in. Let's hit add and see if it displays an error message. So even before we fill in any data, okay, good. Let's type in some good data. 2 or something. 2, 4, whatever you want to add. Put another number down here. Okay, we still don't have a number there, so click OK. Type in a number on this field. And click add. Okay. Now do multiply, it should say 6. Yep. So what I want you to do on your own, if you can, is add one more button and make it say divide. And then copy and paste. Okay. Yeah.
Copy paste.
Just copy from that button
This one.
and you can do divide by it. Exactly. And that's what I want to do today. That's the end. Like I said, we could optimize it a little bit so that if there was an error, it would jump right to the field that needed to be fixed. How about as soon as they click the button, we go back to the first field? I'm only going to do that for the add one, but you could do this on all of them if you wanted to. After they click the button, so at the bottom of the first click method we did, the one that does addition, do this. This dot text box one dot focus. Parentheses in parentheses, like that. And so as soon as they click the button, it's going to put the cursor on that text box. We could blank it out, or we could make it so that all that text was selected. Honestly, I don't remember how to do that. I'd have to Google it up, but it'd be nice. Right? You click this, if there was an error message, it would highlight the field and select all the text in it. That would be the awesome thing to do. All right, we're stopping.